in this video, I quickly want to talk about mixing and mastering. It's the thing that will make and break your music. Mixing and mastering is something that you do to create better sounds. If you have a very good song, but you don't mix and master it properly, you won't have a good song. You can't send it to labels. It won't sound that good. You need to get really good at mixing and mastering. And the first thing I need to get out of the way is you will get better at it by doing it, but you will also get better by actively listening to other music. So if you listen to the famous stuff like Deaf and Wild, Atmospheres, Soundrush, Aftershock, you listen to it, you're like, this is clean, and you need to take your mix or your song, put it next to the other song, and think, what is the difference? Is it more compressed, more equalized? Like, really actively listen to it. And this is the thing that once you start producing, it kind of ruins the fun in music if you get too serious about it. But you will go to festivals and clubs and non-stop analyze everything. It's a little bit of a curse, but you need to listen to music and be like, where did they put the hi-hat? Where did they put the drums? Why is it filtered? All that stuff. That's just, the basics. Let's get into it. So I have a drum loop here, right? I routed it to my mixer, and this is the first thing. That's why it's so important to route everything to your mixer, what you're making your song. So melodies, vocals, drums, always put it in your mixer. Don't have any sound not in your mixer, because you want to control everything and do it in the right way. Here's your mixer. Put the sound in, and there are a few main effects. So the first one being an equalizer, and then with an equalizer you will change some stuff. As you can hear, you can change frequencies, you can boost frequencies, you can't change the pitch, but you can change frequencies. You can change how high, how much treble there is, mids, bass, and you can see the signatures here. In general, if you want a clearer sound, add more treble. If you want to muffle it, remove treble. If you want, as you can hear. And this is something that you won't really realize at first, but once you get better at producing, you will notice that some sounds are just muffled, which you wouldn't notice if you don't focus on it. But like, this is a pretty muffled drum loop. If I boost it more, it's so much more present. So that's why you add treble. Mids are generally too loud, and you can remove bends. So as you can see big peaks like this one here. You might want to reduce it, and that removes some mud. And it's the same for these peaks. You can find peaks, And then same goes for the bass here. You can remove that a little until it's clear, and you can hear the difference already. Let's boost the highs a little bit more. And that is mixing. So it's a very subtle difference, but I just improved this drum loop. If I play like this, unmixed, you can hear a very nice difference. And this is what just makes and breaks your song. And a lot of beginning producers or producers that don't get to the next level don't really utilize the mixing the right way. So that is EQing. And there's a very basic rule. If you have stuff that doesn't need bass, so let's say you say, okay, let's just clap. Why does a clap need bass? It doesn't. So remove the bass. And how you remove the bass is open an equalizer, and you don't just take it down. Not like this. Now the bass is not removed, because if I add one more EQ, you can see there's still bass. So you need to go into your EQ and left click this one, type high pass, order steep 8, and put it here. And now you actually removed it, right? So that's it. And let's talk a little bit about, this is still mixing, but there is something that ties into equalizers, and that is filters. So there's a few types of filters that you can use. So the first one being a low pass. If you do this, it's called a low pass or high cut. You're cutting the highs and you're passing the lows like this. Here you're cutting the lows, so a low cut, and you're passing the highs. So this is a high pass and a low cut, and this is a high cut and a low pass, right? It's counterintuitive. So that's one thing. And then finally you have a band pass like this, and it passes a band, so you can select the band yourself. And you have a band stop, which basically just means a stop in the band. So those are 4 types of filters. You will find them in every plugin, every synthesizer and everything. Just get it down and just understand what it is. But that just works with an equalizer. An equalizer uses frequencies, and you can manipulate them and create a filter. So That is what a low pass sounds like. And this is what a high pass sounds like. And you can add resonance like this. And that is just what resonance sounds like. So those are the thing, filter plus resonance, and you have different types of filters. Pretty straightforward. So that's your EQ. But if you want to actually cut the bass, you open this one on high pass and just remove it like this and put it at steep 8 or steep 6, whatever you want. 2 is fine. As well, depends on the sound. But in general, you want to remove the bass and just create a little bit less resonance like this. So it's nice and tidy. And as you can see, the bass is now actually removed compared to the other method, which is much better. So that's an equalizer. Let's talk about other plugins. So one more is compression. And compression is something that you will use a lot as well. Compression is the act of taking a sound and then saying, here's a threshold in terms of decibels, and everything under and above it needs to get pulled to that threshold. And you know, that is based, and it's doing that based on these settings. But basically, how you will compress every sound is just taking your sound, then just reading the part where it starts going like, you know, you can see it here. This part is all solid, right? It's totally green. But in here, you can actually see it go like wibbling between left and right. So it's hitting its peak, and that's around 9 to 12 decibels. So I take this down to 9 and 12, like this. And then I just open up the ratio to 4. So that is now compressed. And how fast does it start compressing? So you have the sound going in and then bam, the compressor starts hitting, right? No, if you put the attack on 70 milliseconds, the sound gets in, the compressor waits 70 milliseconds, and then it starts compressing. So if you, in general, 15 will work in any scenario. But 0, it just immediately starts. This takes a little bit more time, etc. So I put it at around 15. The release is the opposite. So how long does it take until it stops compressing? So 200 milliseconds is fine as well. That's about it. Here's the gain knob. You can change the gain, and you can change the compression types, which are just some models of compression, right? Hard compression is something that I only use. It's good enough. So now, let's take down the gain. We actually compressed it as well. And we can change the EQ, we add that as well. And now you can already, this is why mixing is something that works together with each other. If I first equalize my sound and remove a lot of stuff, right, the decibels will get lower. So if I then compress it, I will get a different sound comparing to first compressing it, then removing frequencies. You know, it's different. So think about what you need to put first. And I can't tell you in detail what you need to do because it's so situation specific. It's something that you just learn to do, and it's something that you can then apply to any scenario. It's not like you're going to learn a scenario by heart. There's just rules you follow. For example, cut the bass on claps, hi-hats, vocals. You want to cut bass on stuff that doesn't need bass. And you need to control the bass if you want to have a less muddy sound. You need to control very prominent mid frequencies if you want to have a less harsh sound, you know, like less resonant. And you need to boost the highs to get more presence and muffle them if it's annoying. And another thing about equalizing is, you know, it's all about the total mix. So if I have a vocal playing, a bass line, and a very sharp drum loop, do you think I want a lot of highs in my bass? No, I don't. So if I have hi-hats playing and a very full song with a lot of shit, do I need to cut the highs like this a little bit on my bass? Hell yeah, because otherwise it gets totally cluttered. You need to see the mix as a place. Like, let's see, if you have a room, you would put certain stuff. That's what I like to visualize stuff. If you have a room, you want to put stuff in a nice way. You wouldn't put the couch on top of the chair, on top of the television. No, you put that in different places. So it's the same with frequencies. Hi-hats need to have the highs. The mids might be for vocals and leads, and the bass is for bass. And then you might have spots like, oh, I have a vocal and leads on top of each other in my mix. So one place is too full. Now I can say, well, the vocals go to the right channel and the leads to the left one. Or the leads go a little bit in the middle and the vocals go on the stereo side. So that is mixing. And you need to just think about, you know, you just make your song first and then you sit back and go like, okay, let's listen to this. What needs to happen? A lot of people just make the song and be like, yeah, mixing goes later. No, when you make a song, always follow the rule. I added a clap, remove the bass, do some corrective EQing, like making it a little bit sharper, clearer, removing some mids, basic EQing and compression. That's what you will apply to every sound as you make your song. And at the end, you sit back and see, okay, what can I remove? Or what can I do? Is it too compressed? Is it too harsh? It's not something you can predict. It's something that happens once you made the song. And then you go like, okay, how do I design my room? You know? And the moment you nail that, and the moment you don't have a muddy mix because you took down the prominent mids, those are very important and very annoying. You cut the bass on everything that doesn't need bass, and you control everything with compression and make sure. And we go into limiting and stereoizing. If you did do that, you have a very clean mix, and you get a long way. And obviously, control the volumes compared to each other. So, compression EQing is done. So let's now talk about something else, which is limiting. Limiting is the act of cutting peaks. And a limiter is the same thing as a very steep compressor. So if I put this at 30 dB, it's close to a limiter because it just stops the sound once it hits the threshold. So basically, a limiter is just a ceiling which just cuts the peaks. And this is very nice if you have very clicky songs, and that's where you will use a limiter for mastering to boost volume and to cut it at 0 dB, or just to cut very annoying clicky peaks. Like if I talk like that, you would get these like peaks. I remove the peaks, bam, I'm done. And this is something that goes hand in hand with a compressor. If I add a compressor and make it very, very aggressive, right? You can see it creates these peaks compared to now you have these, and now I add the compressor and you get peaks, and that is because you have this attack here. So a very fast attack like this creates a peak that is almost unnoticeable, but you can cut it. And then you can kind of control how harsh this sounds. So that's a limiter for you, very straightforward. Finally, we go into stereo imaging. So, I might want to put this one right and then add a different loop and put this one through the same to another one here and put that more to the left. And I want to cut the bass because I already have bass. You generally don't want double bass, so. And as you can hear, there's like a very prominent peaks. So I go back through the limiter and cut those peaks. As you can hear. There you go. So remove that one. Now we just controlled both of these and we made a very nice stereo imaging. So that's what you're going to do with mixing. You're going to make a song, listen, and be like, okay, I have my leads playing and the leads need to go left or right. No, the leads in general go into the middle. So this is like, I'm going to give you a list. Sub bass, totally mono, and in the middle and nothing special, okay? No reverb, no highs, it's just the sub bass middle. The bass could be stereo. There's no issue with bass being a little bit stereo, especially those high frequencies, those can be a little bit stereo. But then we can add something else. So if I have a bass and only vocal playing, sure, add some highs in your bass because you want to have a clear bass. But if there's a bass, a vocal, drums and leads playing, get down those highs a little bit. And it's so hard to describe every situation, but you just need to cut the bass in every sound that doesn't need bass, compress it and limit it for every sound, okay? And then listen to other music, compare their equalization mix, their frequency spectrum to yours, then take a compressor and limiter and just think about how do I get my claps to sound the way their clap sounds. Do that for every song and you will get good at mixing. You just need to make sure that in every song you add the following chain of EQ, limiting, compression, and then equalizing at the end to corrective EQ it. So that's what I always do. I add some stuff, then I add a compressor and limiter, and then I add another EQ at the end just to make a corrective thing here and just make sure it's totally clean. And cut the bass one more time if needed because plugins during the chain here might generate some bass, for example, distortion. So that's the basic thing about this, and it doesn't really get worse than this. It's funny how like 4 or 5 effects make or break your song, right? Compression, EQ, limiting, stereo imaging, and that's about it. So that's the basics of mixing. There's a few more plugins that you need to know, which is multiband compression. So multiband compression is taking a compressor and then having a compressor just do different parts of your bands. So let's say you have an equalizer. This part gets a compressor, this one as well, and this one as well. So it will look like this, fruity multiband compressor, bam. You have one for low, mid, and high band. So there's the same compression settings like this in every band, and you can control both of all of them together. You can change the bands. In general, I just use OTT, which is an over-the-top multiband compressor. It's very nice. It's free. It's great to get extra presence and power in your song. So you use this one as well. Any further, you can use stereo shaper. So this is like nothing on the hand, like nothing going on. And here you can separate it from left and right a little bit with like delay. There's a little bit of delay between left and right. 11 milliseconds. I use this a lot if I want to make it wider. This is a little bit different compared to stereo imaging. This is literally saying I have a sample and let's delay left and right. So let's say left plays and then 11 milliseconds later the right plays. That's a stereo shaper. But if I take a Ozone 8 and there's a stereo imager, it's a free plugin from them. But if I take that one, you can actually create stereo imaging, which is different. And that is just taking the bands and making them all very wide. As you can see, it makes it wider in here. So that's stereo imaging. And you will want to apply this. So your bass will actually, sub bass looks like this, right? And then your mid bass might look like this. Your mid bass. So let's say just to visualize how everything looks. I have my sub bass and it looks like that, like this. This is my sub bass. My mid bass might be a little bit more wide. My vocals, very wide. My leads, a little bit less. The hi-hats could be like this. The clap could be a little bit tight and the kick pretty tight as well, right? It's just about different frequencies having different stereo separation. And you need to think about, well, the hi-hats go a little bit to the left. Do I have room on the right? Yeah, sure. Okay, let's put an effect on the right instead of just putting it in the middle. So that's where you make and break your song, the stereo imaging. If you do this the right way, you will get a very good mix, which is super, super important. So EQing always at the bass, make the highs higher in a lot of sounds. A lot of music is muffled, so get the highs a little bit higher, not too much. Cut annoying peaks. So if I take a vocal or anything, you will see very prominent bands, right? So if I take, let's see, a synth, for example, an arpeggio, and I put it here, I add an equalizer. We already EQ'd this, but as you will see, I can cut the bass on an arpeggio and then remove some of these bands. It's too prominent, especially this high one. And then here, you might want to boost it. Not too much, but it's a little bit clearer. But it depends. If you want a warm sound, cut the highs a little bit. If you want a present sound and a clear sound, boost the highs. That's something you need to realize yourself. You know, that's pretty straightforward. You can take a screech loop. So what you will find with screeches, arpeggios, leads, vocals, stuff that has very melodic parts in it, you will find prominent mid frequencies, and you need to remove those. Here you go. You can see it. And there's a balance, because this screech loop sounds melodic because of that band. So don't remove it too much. But you can get it down a little bit. Pretty good. Maybe boost the highs or remove them. Very nice. So there's one more thing, a dynamic EQ. Take Ozone 8. There's a dynamic EQ in here. What it does is just, it moves based on dynamics. So it's an EQ that works dynamically. You can see it move. And you can cut it as well. You can see it work. It's just like a compressor EQ vibe. It's nice to have if you want more subtle EQing and you want to have it very specific to a scenario. But those are the basics, and there's really not that much else that you can do to make it better. If you understand this and keep doing it in every song, you will get better and better and better. And you need to just compare your music to professional music, and that will make and break your music. Let's get into mastering. Mastering is pretty straightforward. You take your song, you make sure it goes to 0 dB without it clipping. That's it. You don't want to have your sound clipping, but you do want the most volume you can get. So you can add a few things to achieve that. If you have a very hard bass in your song, too loud, and you want to boost it, you don't leave a lot of room for the other frequencies to get boosted before it starts clipping. So just remove a little bit of bass if needed, or boost the bass. So the first thing you add is a corrective EQ. Get some dynamic EQ is nice for this because it's very specific to scenarios. If it's very loud at certain points and other points it's not, then it will cut the parts at the points where it's loud and where it's not loud. You will find a dynamic way to do that. So you can also do it like this, corrective EQ, boost the highs a little. In general, what I always do is literally boost the highs slightly. A lot of music is just not clear enough, so boost the highs. Then I'm always like getting rid a little bit of these mids because those might be too muddy. And then finally I go to 300 dB and create a steep cut in here. It really makes a really big difference. So then you might control the bass. So this is what a corrective EQ for me would look like in a mastered song. Then you literally want to take a multiband compressor. You can take this one here, right click, mix, preset, take mastering 6 dB. It's just a multiband setting, pretty easy. And then you add Maximus. And in Maximus you will select Clear Master RMS until it starts clipping. You can move the post gain here. That is a good master. You can replace any plugin. So you can use Pro Q for this one. You can use OTT. Well, not OTT, sorry. You can use the King from WA Production, which is pretty cool. You can also use Ozone 8. So if you have Ozone 8, pretty cool. You just remove all these effects. You can take a reference song, literally whatever song you want. And then it will take the master and replicate the loudness and the EQ spectrum. You can just add a reference tune here, add the song in here. And then you go to Master Assistant, Reference, take that song, start playing your song, and it will match it to the master of that song that you choose. But you can also not do reference. You can do Master Assistant, Streaming, you play your song, and it starts adding effects, and you can then tweak it. All the effects I talked about here, all the mixing effects, you can add them again. So basically, mixing is doing every individual sound, and mastering is taking all these sounds together as one, and then adding final mixing, which is then called actually mastering. It's kind of the same thing. It's just getting the most volume and the clearest mix out of your song without having it clip. That's mastering. You will generally see a dynamic EQ to control a little bit of these subs. It gets rid of the, make it higher, not everywhere, but make sure it's very clear. Then I add one more EQ to always cut like these annoying 300 Hertz. Might remove a little bit of the mids too with the dynamic EQ as well to make it a little bit clearer. So there you go. Then I want to add an imager. So I might want to have these highs a little bit more excited like this and the sub very mono. Just set the right settings, and the band of the bass is like this. Okay, pretty cool. So then I always have a maximizer. You put it at any of these modes. It's just how the maximizer responds, but find a threshold that works, and a peak is 0 dB. Just find a nice threshold until it starts clipping, and then you want to add more output gain or input gain, whatever you want, until it's, as long as it's at a 0 dB, right? That's it. That's mastering. A master is very often overcomplicated. It is a complicated subject. I'm not saying it's easy. Mastering experts are very good at what they do, of course, but it's overcomplicated to the point where people think it's a magic thing. It's just you add stuff to make it as loud as possible, and then it will work. So that's mixing and mastering. I hope you found it enjoying and you thought it was useful. Just get good at it. It's like 60% of your song is actually also about mixing and mastering. If you get good at this, you will be a very, very good producer. So good luck.